42 and really had lived out so much of his life. And so sitting there on top of that mountain, looking out at this landscape, he also has a nose full of the scent of 42, whose scent was lingering in the sagebrush and the trees and on the trail from having walked through there only a couple weeks before. And he curls up under a tree and he dies on his own terms after 9 years of living out life as a wolf in Yellowstone. Shortly after that, the Druid Peak pack more or less falls apart. Without that leadership, the pack cycles through a couple of leaders, and Casanova comes back into the picture. And now, those daughters have no attachment to this pack necessarily. Casanova comes in, and 21's daughters leave with Casanova, and they go off and they start their own pack, the Blacktail pack, which continued on for about 15 more years, the Blacktail pack. And Casanova actually became a really great alpha male, very protective, great leader, all of this. And the question is, back on that day when 21 let him go, did he know that it was because one day he wasn't going to be around anymore? And that by letting him live, he knew that, well, Casanova, I'm not interested in him right now, but one day he'd be a great mate for my daughters. and you know, take that however you want. But number 21's genetics lived on through his daughters because of the pact they formed with Casanova after his death. So there's the emotional way we can describe this. There's also something that's seated deeply in evolution, where there's a resistance to killing that wolf. So now we're going to switch to another wolf. And this is wolf number 926. And we're fast forwarding a little bit. This is the granddaughter of 21. So the great granddaughter of number 9, right? And 926 lived a very different life, very different life. 21 was a fictional character, right? But he also lived in a fictional Yellowstone where elk populations were artificially inflated, where there was food everywhere. The ecosystem hadn't really come back into balance in terms of prey populations versus predator populations. But also wolves at the time of 21 were protected under the Endangered Species Act. Number 920 was born into a world after the wolves were delisted in 2011, and born into a world of wolf hunting. And a world where instead of there being 17,000 elk, there was 3,000 elk around her area. So in the first year of her life, she was born in 2011. In the first year of her life, she watched her mother who was at the time the most famous wolf in the world. If you remember news articles a few years back about a famous wolf in Yellowstone getting killed by a hunter, it was her mother, 926's mother. Her name was 06. She's also 832. But whatever. So 926, in the same year, in just her very first winter of life, watched her mother shot by a hunter and watched her uncle shot by a hunter. This is a strange pack where her mother had scraped together her own pack by her own will. She had found 2 brothers and made them both her alpha male because one wasn't good enough for her. So 926 kind of grew up with early on with these kind of 2 fathers and 1 mother, and in her first year of life watched mom get shot and watched one of her fathers get shot, her uncle get shot. After that happened, the pack kind of disintegrated. There was a power vacuum that was left. There was an intense amount of sibling rivalry that cropped up throughout this period without this leadership. Let me skip past that. And so 926 had 3 older sisters that were kind of the generation above her. They were born in the previous year, and they all descended into a bunch of kind of sibling rivalry. 2 of the sisters killed one of the others. Meanwhile, the surviving alpha male, he went out and found a new mate to try to restabilize the pack, and he brought his new mate back to the rest of the pack, and the sisters immediately killed her and ousted the alpha male, who gave up, and he walked 15 miles south through a different valley on the other side of Yellowstone and started a whole new life, just started over. And so So 926, this is just her first year of life. Mother killed, uncle killed, father ousted, sister killed by her other sisters, right? Just amazing differences between that and 21's life. And because of this, she just became known as like the little wolf that could. She had a remarkable amount of tenacity. And so wolf watchers started at one point calling her Spitfire, because she was brazen, and she was just faced with so much adversity at every turn that she had no choice but to just face the bison head on and let it chase her away time and time again. So she was a, I'll let this go for a second. Notice there's a grizzly bear over here too, by the way.
Wait, really? What is it? Is it just lying down?
So 926, the whole Lamar Canyon pack, her pack's name was the Lamar Canyon pack, and it had replaced the Druid Peak pack. Still had a lot of genetics from 21, of course. The Lamar Canyon pack just kind of disappeared off the radar screen for a while. And wolf watchers in Yellowstone are really biting their nails. It was tough as a guide because we go out there and knowing that there are no wolves in this valley right now, so it's going to be hard to find them. So we know that they're not there. They're outside the park, the pack is dissolving. And one day, 926 comes back into the park with this guy, a wolf called 925. But before he had a collar, we called him Big Gray. And Big Gray was a big wolf from an outside pack, and they got together, 925 and 926 had pups, and they regained a toehold in the Lamar Valley after a couple of years of it being very, very scarce out there. So now 925 and 926 have been together for a year. They went out on an elk hunt. And it was 925, 926, and all of their yearling pups. Right? So they had been born just a little less than a year before. And yearlings are pretty useless. They're not experienced enough to fight. They don't know how to kill anything. They're not good hunters yet. They're basically just kind of dead weight when it comes to the pack. And so here's 925 and 926, basically by themselves in terms of actually experienced wolves. And they're having to search farther and wider for prey because there's just less elk to go around. And so they walk west and they walk out of the Lamar Valley, and they walk out of their territory, and they walk in squarely into the territory of the Prospect Peak pack and nearby rivals. And there they find an elk, and there's a dramatic chase that ensues. And 925 and 926 are heading after this elk. The elk is perched up on the very, very edge of a very tall cliff. And often elk will put themselves in that situation backed up to a big cliff so that nothing can get around behind them, right? And the elk will defend itself with its front feet. 926 is about 90 pounds or so, and 925 is probably 120 pounds or so. And a full-grown female elk is about 500 pounds. And wolves that are going after bull elk, which is common, are like 750. So these are animals that are like 6 or 7 times bigger than them, right, that they're hunting. But the elk slips and it falls off of the cliff, and it lands at the bottom of the cliff, squarely into the territory of the Prospect Peak pack. So shortly after they have gorged and filled their bellies, the Prospect Peak pack catches something strange on the wind, and it's the scent of all the Lamar Canyon wolves in their territory. And so the Prospect Peak pack was 12 wolves strong. Almost all of them were big, strong adults. And here's 925 and 926, full from a big, huge meal with a bunch of useless yearling pups. They're outnumbered and outgunned, and all these prospects are running at them. And so 925, 926, the rest of the pack, they take off running. The prospects are catching up. They're right on their heels. They're getting closer and closer and closer. The Lamars are losing ground. And for reasons that were hard to imagine, 925 stops dead, and he turns around and just stands there, while 926 and the pups just take off. He had let himself be taken down as bait by the prospects so that the rest of the pack could escape. The prospect descend on him. They tear him to ribbons there right on the spot. Some of the pups kind of circle around and try to draw off some of the prospect males. It doesn't work. 925 is basically dead by the end of the day. But in doing so, 926, all the pups survived. They continued running for 5 miles before they slowed down. They made it all the way back to their den site. And now, all of the wolf watchers were thinking probably the same thing that 926 was, which is 926 was pregnant. And she was about to give birth to another litter of pups. And she just lost her, her alpha male, just like her great-grandmother so long ago, number 9, right? And so we're wondering what could possibly happen. 926 is doomed. Her pups are doomed. Just 1 week later, this is looking down to the north end of the Lamar Valley. The den site is basically over here. We hear howling coming from up in the mountains, and we look up, and on this side, right here on this cliff band, way up high, there's 926 and her pups, way up there, just hanging out on top of the cliff, because why not? And we look up though, and they're not howling. It's somebody else that's howling. And they are deep, low baritone howls that you know, alpha female and a bunch of pups wouldn't be able to make. And we look over, and 926 is also like, where is that howling coming from, right? Hearing howling coming from your territory when you're the only wolf, when you thought you were the only wolf in your territory, is a little alarming, right? And then we train our scopes right over here to the other side of this canyon. And there are 4 big, huge male prospect wolves. 4 of the same wolves that had just killed her alpha mate just a couple of days before. And they are locked onto her, and they see her. And there's a whole bunch of yearling pups there that are not related to those wolves. And 926 is about to give birth to a bunch of pups that don't belong to these prospect males. And so it's getting dark, we're all biting our nails. 926 sees them, and her and the pups take off running down the cliff and disappear into these trees. And the prospect males run down the cliff and disappear into the exact same spot. And then it gets too dark to see. And so, like, it was a very quiet dinner that night. We were wondering what is going to happen to 926. Oh my gosh, can she not catch a break? And we wake up in the morning and we go out looking for 926. And this is what we find. We find her with the 4 prospects. This is not, you know what those wagging tails mean, right? Sorry for the home video quality of this thing. But this is the 4 males and 926. They had come looking for a new friend. But all 4 of these males were trying to compete with each other for which one 926 would love the best. And so this is a wolf called 965, this beautiful white one, who is dominating one of his brothers called Twin, while 926 right here is not paying attention. She's like, whatever. And so, you know, basically 926 picks one of these males, comes to an alpha female, has pups. You want that story to end happily, but over the next year, one by one, all 4 of these males die. One dies to disease, one dies in a battle with a rival pack, one just disappears off the map entirely, and one is shot by a hunter. And now it's 926, alone, again. The next season she goes out, she brings back another alpha female, or alpha male, her 3rd alpha male. A brother was tagging along, and so she's like, okay, this is my chance. They have pups together, all the pups die of mange. That male she brought back dies of canine distemper. Now it's just her, 1 daughter that managed to survive, and this brother that tagged along with the other alpha male, and that's it. So 926 has lost 3 alpha males. Her father was ousted from the pack, her uncle was killed, her mother was killed, her sister was killed by others. You know, just can't possibly catch a break. Right.
What happened to the youngsters?
All the pups basically died. Every litter of pups that she had kind of died, mostly due to disease. The yearlings when these 4 prospect males showed up, the yearlings that were hanging around, the daughters didn't mind them at all, big, huge, handsome male wolves. But the male yearlings of 926, her sons, they weren't very interested in those prospects being the new stepdads. And so they left the pack, left the park, and were shot. immediately on the board. So then it's 926. It's that male brother of the other alpha male. So there's 926, there's another adult, and there's the daughter of 926, who's now a couple of years old. And they had kind of just disappeared off the radar screen. We kind of thought that they were dead. We didn't know what had happened. On the rare occasion that we did see them, we didn't see any pups with them. We thought that this pack was just basically just, you know, on its way out. And then in the middle of October, we're just now a month ago, right, or a couple months ago, so this October, wolf watchers go out and they see 926's daughter in the front of the pack. They're all walking across the Lamar Valley. There's the daughter in the front. Behind her is that other brother. And behind them is a whole bunch of pups, and behind them is 926. And so now 926 is no longer the alpha female. She kind of ceded her power to the daughter. And now 926 is a grandma. I know that's really how you want the story to end. That's not how it ends, though. So when I was preparing this talk, when I was starting to think about how I wanted to do this talk, 926 was still alive. Just about 3 weeks ago, 926 and her pack left the park just over the border, and 926 was shot. And you know, woke up one morning to this in the headlines, right? So, oh my gosh, so unfortunate that that happened. But for this particular wolf, is it really surprising that at the end of the day, this is how she met her end with one more of these big, huge struggles like this, right? And but you know, in terms of the big picture, she had lived through everything, and what she finally got to see happen before she was killed was she got to become a grandmother. She got to see her daughter give birth to pups and continue the lineage of this Lamar Canyon pack that started way back with number 9, and then with number 21, and then through 06 into 926 into her daughter, and now these pups are still out there. When I head to Yellowstone in a week from now, when we go out looking, we're going to be looking for these pups, and we're going to be looking for the daughter of 926 and her mate, right? So watching wolves is it's heartbreaking sometimes, right? We want our stories to end nice and happily. The thing about watching wolves is that it's not, you know, it's in a way it's watching a soap opera, right? And it's watching a play or an opera or something like that. But the stories that we write tend to always have a nice, clean, tidy package where we wrap things up and we move on. And that's not what happens when you watch wolves, because they live real lives, right? And they are honest lives. And when we watch their stories, we haven't prescribed what the end is going to be. And in a way, that's a much more useful story, because that's what life is actually like for us, right? You know, every single one of our struggles that we have is hard-earned, right? And you know, failure could be around any corner, and you know, it's not always a happy picture in all of this. So I want to just kind of button things up by putting this story of this dynasty of wolves into the larger picture, so that we don't see 926's death by bullet as this tremendous tragedy that it seems like on the surface, and instead look at it at the larger perspective. So first of all, I saved all my graphs and maps and stuff to the very end. When it all started, there was 31 wolves that were reintroduced. Now there's 1,700 wolves throughout northwest Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. Each one of these circles is a known wolf pack. The reintroduction, ecologically speaking, by all measures, has been a tremendous success. And the presence of wolves in the landscape has surpassed the expectations of a lot of the biologists who originally did this in the first place. Wolves are hunted now, right? They're no longer in the Endangered Species Act. The states in this area, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, are not fond of wolves and are doing their darndest to eradicate as many of them as possible. But the thing is, wolves are here to stay, because the Endangered Species Act basically stipulates that if if a population recovers to a certain degree, then the federal government stops managing that population and states can gain the rights to continue managing that. What that often means is that's when hunting starts on that animal, right? But the caveat is that there's a threshold number of wolves that has to remain in the landscape. And if that threshold fails to be met, then the federal government regains control of the management of that species. And for as much as folks in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, in the political side of things, are really against wolves, the one thing that they hate more than wolves is the federal government taking over their ability to manage those wolves. And so wolves are here to stay. And despite the intense hunting pressure, although hunting pressure on these wolves changes their pack dynamics dramatically, think about what a hunter's bullet did to fracturing the Lamar Canyon pack to 926's mother, and what it did when she was shot, right? It changes the dynamics of packs. But overall, the numbers of wolves have remained remarkably steady no matter how many of them end up getting shot. This is the numbers from Idaho. Wolf hunting started in Idaho in like 2010 or maybe 2009 over there. And there's a few hundred wolves shot every year in Idaho, and this is the wolf population. It is kind of rock solid right in the 700s. Wolves are resilient, and wolves are very good at controlling their own numbers, much better than we are. Wolves are a lot better at finding each other. You have to see the shape. This is years down here. This starts in the 60s, and it goes up basically to today. And what this is showing is the number of elk in the northern range of Yellowstone. Way up here at 20,000, and then down here at 4,000 here. And what you see is that in the absence of wolves, wolves are eradicated from the ecosystem, and bears and mountain lions, the elk population really started to skyrocket. Wolves were reintroduced to the ecosystem right about here. And you can see the elk population has come down since. Now, a really important takeaway is that wolves get all the blame for killing all the elk every time. People think that wolves have killed all the elk. Oh my God, there's not going to be any elk left because all the wolves killed them all. And while wolves have contributed to the decline in the elk population from this artificially inflated number down to the carrying capacity, simultaneously with the wolf reintroduction has been a dramatic increase in the number of grizzly bears in the population, the number of mountain lions, both of which contribute more to elk mortality than wolves do. So it's a whole ecological system that's at play here. It's the reintroduction of all the predators and the stability of all the predators, not just wolves. But wolves have contributed to the decline in elk numbers, such that we're seeing changes in the landscape. Now, if you've seen this video that's going around called How Wolves Change Rivers, and the video goes something like, there was a time back in the dark ages when wolves were all killed and everything was horrible. And then the wolves were brought back, and the elk came back, and the skies cleared up, and the waters flowed clean, and the beavers returned, and the songbirds started singing, and the truffula trees sprouted out of the ground, and all that stuff, right? And the narrative of that is that wolves have fixed everything immediately in the last 20 years of their introduction. And as you suspect, it's never that simple. And wolves haven't fixed anything. This is a big, there are major changes to the ecosystem in the absence of all of these, in the absence of predators. And that can't be fixed in 20 years. But things are moving in the right direction. This is a shot of the confluence of the Lamar River in, I think, like 2000 or something like that. And this is that same area last year. And it's moves for scale. So the fact that there's so many willows regenerating here is really promising. A return of riparian vegetation in an area that had been heavily browsed down, to the extent that moose can actually come back into the northern range of Yellowstone in numbers that they haven't really been able to for quite some time. Going back, this is a shot of a particular aspen grove in 2006 and again in 2010, showing that with fewer mouths feeding on vegetation, a lot of these aspen stands that have been having a harder time regenerating are now able to kind of reproduce, and those saplings can get up above the browse line. So we're seeing trends in the right direction. Not quite like the magical unicorns and rainbows thing that you see, but we're moving in that direction, which is really, really great. And then in terms of our relationship with wolves, this reintroduction has changed that quite a bit too. We never expected that there would be a wolf watching economy in Yellowstone. Biologists thought that we'd really reintroduce wolves into the landscape, and that's the last we'd see of them, because they don't like people. It's a tremendously huge place, and we thought they would live out their lives in private. And what was never expected is that they would live out their epic lives right in front of us for us to be able to watch. And as a result, people like Carol can come to Yellowstone and become inspired to write children's books. And people in Vermont on a cold day can come and learn about wolves and imagine what it was like for them to be out there, or for wolves to be here for that matter, right? Let me just bounce back. Also, we're getting better at figuring out how to handle the relationships between the different factions of people that do and do not like wolves. We're paying out large sums of money to livestock ranchers who lose their cattle or sheep due to wolf depredations. Defenders of wildlife and state game management agencies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year paying out livestock losses. In Wyoming, they pay ranchers 7 to 1 for what the cow was worth at the time that it died. And so, the financial loss of wolf livestock conflict is becoming more and more moot. There's obviously a lot buried in that bullet point that we don't have time to unpack. But suffice it to say that we're learning how to figure out this conflict. This is one of my favorite shots of wolves in Yellowstone. This is a wolf called 889. I'm not going to tell you anything about her, other than that she is the descendant of the Crystal Creek wolf pack, the very, very first pack to be reintroduced. Her ancestor was the first paw to be put down after 70 years absence in Yellowstone. And that happened right there at this reacclimation center. And so here is, this wolf 6 or 7 generations out from when her ancestors were released, on a landscape where you can see this tremendous amount of aspen regeneration right here, in between where she is now and where her family came from, which I think is just a really beautiful shot. So, what's the upshot of this, and why do we care so much about watching wolves? Again, we really want that story of 926 to end happily, and it doesn't. But that's significant. For all that 926 went through in her life, she really demonstrated that for wolves, the attitude is looking forward, looking ahead, and saying, what's next? What problem can I overcome today? And perseverance is really the currency of survival, right? And that victories are not really measured in a single day by what happens to one pup or with one bullet or something like that, but it's measured over really long periods of time. The fact that 926 was shot, how lucky are we that there was a wolf there to be shot in the first place, in a sense, right? Wolves have been exterminated, and now they're not. Now they're here to stay, and that's a victory, right? And I think maybe as an ecologist, the takeaway that I have from watching wolves is something that applies so poignantly to our lives as humans, is that the landscape that is the healthiest is often the one that contains the most amount of conflict in it, right? And that seen over long periods of time in the overall trajectory of history, that's how you measure victories. And I think that's what Aldo Leopold was getting at back in the 1960s. He had the first inklings, the first thoughts of reintroducing wolves. And he said, only the mountain has really lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of the wolf. Thank you. If you want to sneak out, you're welcome to. I'm happy to answer as many questions as is out, though. Ken, you want to hit the lights back there? Thanks. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Are llamas used at all in pens for the ranchers to repel wolves, or is that foolish that they couldn't? The second question is, have you seen any measurable impacts of global climate change?
Oh, that's okay. So I can remember both those questions long enough to answer both. So the first question was, are llamas being used as guard animals, essentially, in like sheep herds and stuff? You know, llamas make better guard dogs than dogs. You didn't know that. And guard llamas are being used. I've seen them out there, and it's really fun to go by a herd of sheep and double take and say, that's not sheep. Because they're very defensive of their pack. But you know, even guard animals get killed by wolves once in a while. So guard dogs and guard llamas, it's not a surefire thing. Really, what has been a surefire thing is the concept of range riders that are known as cowboys. Paying a ranch hand to go out there and be with your cattle. A lot of the times, these livestock interactions between wolves are happening not on the rancher's back step, but out on public land. Land that belongs to all of us, where ranchers are paying a couple dollars a head per cow to put them out there and leave them there, and then pick them up in the fall when they're nice and fat, right? And so, you know, we could talk for days about the politics of that, and whether that's antiquated and how we should change these laws. But at the end of the day, one thing that's been very effective is instead of just kicking your cows out the door in the spring and bringing them back in the fall, essentially, to go out to pay a ranch hand, a cowboy, to go out there and stay with them. And just the presence of humans around those cattle is almost a surefire way to prevent livestock predation. The second question you had was about climate change in relation to wolves. And one really poignant one that's being studied intensely right now through the University of Wyoming. A fellow named Arthur Middleton has been doing a ton of research on this that's been picked up by National Geographic a lot. It has to do with the elk populations. And so, you know, what is it? As do the elks, so do the wolves, or something like that. The wolf population, the elk populations are using the landscape very differently than they once did, or have different pressures than they once did. The northern range of Yellowstone, which is where the Lamar Valley is, right? That's not a place where prey species spend their whole lives. They go up, that's high country summer range with nice, fresh, beautiful grass in, you know, late May and June and July. And so elk migrate there to be there to feed on it and then leave. The northern range of Yellowstone is 8 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on average than it was just 25 years ago. And as a result, the amount of time in which grass is actually green there is a lot less, by the order of a few weeks. So, you know, if you've spent much time in Wyoming or Montana, summer doesn't last very long. It's like winter, 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 spring, summer, fall, winter, 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 right? And so you don't have very many weeks to fit in all of the feeding you need to do to get ready for the next winter. So the loss of 3 weeks of nice green forage makes a big difference. And so that has implications for the survivorship of elk, therefore the numbers of elk that are in the ecosystem to be preyed upon, and also as elk shift their distribution, that shifts the distribution of where wolves have to spend their time and when. I don't know that the thread of how wolves have been affected by that has been fully elucidated, but there's been tremendous impacts to the elk by warming temperatures in the northern range. Thanks. Yeah.
I was curious about when you said when you had that chart of the population of the elk. I was wondering if there was impact of just overpopulation and disease, as well as the grizzly bears and other predators.
Almost like a boom-bust thing, where at some point, if there's too many elk, then there's going to be a massive starving die-off or something like that. Yeah, well, and I think you know, that population did fluctuate a lot because they were so far over capacity that in cold winters there would be massive die-offs that you don't necessarily get when there's lower populations. You know, I don't know if there has been a lot of studies looking at whether the overpopulation itself was a cause of their decline. But the key takeaway for that research in that time period when the population did start to decline is that those numbers were coming down as a result of predators being back in the landscape at higher numbers, and major changes in the regulations around elk hunting. that number, when the elk, that graph spiked way up in the beginning in the 60s, that was because we were actually managing elk basically in the same way that we manage cattle, right? You're raising elk to go shoot them. And so our philosophies around game management have also changed over the years. And so it's a lot more complicated than just, there were no wolves, therefore the graph goes up, and then there were wolves, and then therefore the graph goes down. It's a gray area. Yeah. Yes.
You said wolves are here to stay, and then your point about the federal government acting as a deterrent to states because they don't want to lose control of managing the wolves for the federal government. How much is that apt to change under an administration of Trump?
Yeah, I mean the Endangered Species Act so far has held on, and that's really the floodgate that would change everything. The most important piece of environmental law that is out there, period, is the Endangered Species Act. If you're wondering how you can do your part to support wolves or support wildlife in general, and just support responsible wildlife management and all these things, defending the Endangered Species Act is a really good place to start right now, because that is being, there are attempts to erode that away, right? So if there's no Endangered Species Act, then there's no more a disincentive for the states to not kill all of their delisted species, right? So keep an eye on the Endangered Species Act, and when you see that in the news, pay attention to that, and that's a really good place to invest your attention if you're a wildlife.
Would it help to right now call our representatives in Congress?
Yeah, I think so, because
Just register our support?
I think that's a really smart idea. I think that a lot of folks don't understand the power that the Endangered Species Act actually has. It's an environmental law that has a lot of teeth, and it muddles up a lot of government progress in a very good way. And for the benefit of things like wolves and grizzly bears and all that. And so, but that's not something that's necessarily recognized by politicians who usually, environmental issues are not their very top priority. And so it may not be understood that the Endangered Species Act it's not just one of the many acts out there. It is like the thing that is the most important act for wildlife preservation, at least endangered species. Yeah. So I think that would be a wise thing to do. Yeah.
All the watchers of the wolves, don't the wolves then learn to be unwary of humans so that when they wander out of the park, they're basically sitting ducks for the hunters?
Before I answer that question, it reminds me to remind you to check out in the back corner of the lobby out there are a whole bunch of articles that I put out. Half of them are articles about that were published in the early 1990s, before the reintroduction actually happened, about what was going on politically, what was the scene, what was the culture around this. They're all local papers from Montana and Idaho and Wyoming. The other stack of papers is all modern headlines about what's going on. A couple of those papers address your question, which is, from a population standpoint, a wolf is a wolf is a wolf. A wolf in Yellowstone is no more important, ecologically speaking, than a wolf that's in the Beartooth National Forest or the Zorka National Forest, right? But a wolf is not a wolf when it comes to the amount of ecotourism dollars that wolf brings in, for instance, right? Should we treat the wolves in Yellowstone differently from a management perspective than wolves outside of the park? And the other piece that's really important to think about is the behavior of wolves different in Yellowstone because they have grown up essentially around people. The Lamar Canyon den site is like 1/8 of a mile away from a road. And so anytime the wolves want to bring food back and forth between pups and elsewhere, they have to cross the road. They spend all day long with 1,000 people standing on these weird strips of asphalt, pointing big telescopes up at them. And that is just part of their life. They get used to that. That said, wolves generally don't want anything to do with us. And if you're out in Yellowstone and you leave that asphalt and start walking towards the wolves, they'll get up and walk half a mile away, right? But there are plenty of times where wolves walk right in front of a car, or they don't nearly have the fear of humans that wolves outside of the park do because they haven't grown up with them. And so, 926, when she was shot, was basically walking right down the road near Cook City. So to her, what's the difference between walking down the road there and walking down the road 5 miles back, near the den site? And that brings into question, one of the tenets of hunting in our country, which is, the idea of fair chase. If you're going to hunt an animal, it has to be a hunt and not just, going to the grocery store and picking up your wolf next to the pork aisle, right? There has to be an element of actual challenge to this, and it has to be, a fair fight. And are the wolves in Yellowstone sufficiently different that it's no longer fair chase to hunt them at the borders of Yellowstone, because a wolf that's walked over the boundary from Yellowstone is going to behave differently than a wolf that grew up living outside of the national forest away from people. So it's not an answer question, is the short answer of all of that. It remains to be seen. One thing that did happen after wolves were delisted, and then 06, the most famous wolf in the world, was shot within a couple of weeks, is there's a huge amount of pressure to put quotas along the borders of Yellowstone. So even if hunting couldn't be closed at the border, the harvest numbers could be reduced. So now along the northern edge of the park, the quota is, off the northeastern side, the quota is 2 wolves. Off the northwestern side is 2 wolves. And 2 wolves is a lot better than unlimited quotas, but 2 is enough for 926 to get shot, for instance. So it's a good step in the right direction, and I see it as a great act of compromise, Sandal.
Yeah. How many people work in Yellowstone on wolf dynamics? And does every wolf that's like born in Yellowstone get numbers?
Not every wolf. About something like 30% of wolves in the park wear radio collars at some point in their life. The wolves that don't wear radio collars don't get numbers. But often there's an effort to radio collar the alphas of the pack, because if you follow the alphas around, you're likely to have most of the rest of the pack around as well. There are some great crews of people who do amazing. Are any of you here tonight? Any wolf crew people? We're talking to some of, okay. So no one fact check me. There are some absolutely remarkable wolf crew technicians that go out every winter, and they spend, there's some focused wolf studies where there's a crew of people that go out, and there's a team of 3 people that's assigned to every single pack in the park, and they spend basically sun up to sundown every single day, regardless of the weather, regardless of the temperature, with eyeballs through spotting scopes on those wolves if they're in view, recording every little movement they make, everything they do. So there's a ton of time invested in watching that and then collating that. And then above all that, there's a team of National Park Service biologists who are kind of collating that data. There's Doug Smith, who, if you've seen a guy in a handlebar mustache with a Park Service hat talking about wolves, that's Doug Smith. And there's a couple other people that are also head biologists on all this. But it's a fairly small crew other than that. In addition to the National Park Service, there's also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has their wolf people, and USGS has their wolf people, and the state game agencies have their people, and so there's a big collaborative network of wolf biologists that work together on this stuff. Another long answer to what should have been a short one.
No, I'm glad to hear there's a lot of people.
Yes.
Are there any other healthy wolf pack areas in the states besides in Yellowstone?
So Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan have larger wolf populations than the West does. You don't hear about it because you never see them. The area is forested. You can't just go out and set up a spotting scope and look over 5 miles of landscape until you find them, which makes it sound easier than it actually is. Yeah, those states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, they never actually lost their wolves. They were never extirpated. They were always there all along. They had been harvested down to the brink of extinction, I believe, but they returned on their own through exchange from Canada. So it's a continuous population from Canada down in. And there's essentially a continuous population now in the West from Canada down into Montana. And so there's genetic exchange all the way through. A wolf that was, did I say this already? A wolf that was trapped in northwest Wyoming was just found at the edge of the Grand Canyon a couple years ago. So when I said that wolves can get up and walk 1,000 miles, like that's an example of it, walking from
Are there
Yellowstone
any
to the
in
Grand
Maine?
Canyon.
Any in Maine?
I don't think there are any in Maine. Yeah, I think it's a matter of time. Well, the wolf conversation in the east is tricky because a lot of our coyotes have a lot of wolf genetics in them, and that's an ongoing area of research, certainly, to figure out what does that actually mean. Is it that wolves and coyotes are actually interbreeding somewhere, or is it that these are self-breeding populations of these things that at one point got wolf genetics mixed in? But there are wolves in Ontario. They're not very far away, and in some I do wonder if they show up in Maine now and again. And I think it's just a matter of time until they might be found more regularly. I think that wolf I think it's unrealistic. A lot of debate around this, around is there a place for wolves in the Northeast, in the Adirondacks, in Maine, and we could all share our opinions on that forever. I think that wolves are hard to live with, and if they're hard to live with out west, where there's nobody anywhere out there, then I think they would be impossible to live with here. They might do fine, hunting white-tailed deer in the Adirondacks. Like we could have a population. But I think, is it worth the incredible amount of headache that would cause? It would be, I think the stories out west would be a drop in the bucket compared to having wolves in our own backyards, on Hunter Mountain or something. I'm just kind of speculating, so don't have to get into that.
No one has a question about a slide, about 3 or 4 slides back.
Hey, no one.
The one with the Crystal Creek wolf that you said was your favorite photo? Right?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
What was your question?
There's a wolf there, and then there's something like.
Oh, good eye. See if you can tell me what that is.
What's up there in that field?
Yeah, there's a bison right there.
Oh, yeah, you saw it.
Let's see. Bison there. So.
You explained how the loss of one individual population would really have an effect. So I was wondering, are there any studies being conducted about the original Canadian population that these wolves were taken from and how that has changed as a result of the reintroduction?
Yeah, there's like a whole other side of this whole reintroduction story. It's this beautiful gain to the Yellowstone ecosystem. But like up in Canada, somebody's missing some wolves up there. And I don't think there's been any study at all on what that process did to those local areas. Wolves were taken from essentially the edge of Wood Buffalo National Park, or is that what's, it's a Canadian national park called Wood Buffalo National Park, and there was 31 wolves taken from that, so that's not a huge number considering when there's hundreds and hundreds of wolves harvested in legal hunts down here. 31 is in the sense a drop in the bucket, unless it was part of your pack. So I don't know. I was actually really curious about that myself as I was putting all this together. I was thinking, wait a minute, no one ever said what happened to the rest of the wolves in Canada. So yeah, I'm curious as well about that. Yeah.
Do people who shoot wolves, do they do anything with them? Can you use a poke for poke? Can you eat them?
You can't really eat them. It's a trophy. So you're hunting it for the pelt or for the taxidermy or something like that. And shooting a wolf is not just shooting wolf. It's like, there's a lot of different reasons why one might shoot a wolf. But like I said before, a wolf is more than just something with a whole bunch of fur on it. It's more than just 100 pounds of meat with fur on it. It's symbolic. And in the early days of wolf hunting, when they were delisted and that first hunt happened, there was a surprising, statistically significant amount of Yellowstone wolves that were harvested right over the border. The number of wolves that were wearing radio collars in Yellowstone, I said, is about 30%. More than half of the wolves that were harvested that were Yellowstone wolves were wearing radio collars. I didn't say that very well. But a disproportionately large number of the Yellowstone wolves that were shot over the border were wearing collars. So the question is, were those wolves actually targeted? You have all these wolves to choose from throughout the northern Rockies. Are folks going out to target collared Yellowstone wolves because shooting those wolves means something different. It's a statement. So add another layer to the complexity of our feelings around wolves, and think about the dynamics of Yellowstone wolves that were shot in that early hunt.
Can the hunters hack into the collars?
Not easily, but yeah, there's definitely a wolf hunting website that said as much as, if you have the ability to turn on a radio receiver, tune your channels to this range, to the frequency, and start scanning. And so I think it's very, I certainly don't want to paint every wolf hunter, in that light. There's a lot of folks that I think are really good people that hunt wolves. I don't agree with them, but they're nice people, and everybody has their own reasons for doing things. One of the things I really don't understand is tuning in a radio antenna to the frequency of a wolf swooping, so no fair chase there. And that's never been, officially confirmed, but it happened. Yeah.
But you're only collaring the alphas, and the alphas are the bigger ones, right? So more advantageous.
Well, so you said that you're calling the alphas are bigger, so wouldn't that be a better trophy, right? The only thing that matters is the pelts. When you wear a collar, it wears all the fur off of your neck. So the pelt is actually ruined. You can't get anything for a pelt that's been wearing a radio collar because the fur is not intact in the neck. And so it's a choice, to shoot a collared wolf or a non-collared wolf. And if you're shooting one with the collar, assuming there were other wolves there, you made the decision to do that. Yeah. And it does cost researchers a lot of money. Each one of the telemetry radio collars, the ones that just emit a beep, costs about $4,000 when all is said and done to put on an animal. GPS collars that they wear cost about $20,000 when all is said and done to put on. Between the technology, hiring the helicopter, the ketamine tranquilizer, all of the stuff that goes into the whole process of the collaring operation, it's a lot of money invested in these collars. So it's a big hit to research when we lose collared wolves.
Why was there a data gap in the 80s on your part?
On the elk gap there? I think there was just a couple of years where they couldn't do that survey. I don't know if it was just bad weather, if it was something else, but I think it was just lack of data because they couldn't get out and do the elk survey. Lack of funding or something. Yeah. So there were help. It didn't suddenly go down to zero. It was just that there was no survey conducted that year. Well, so I'll kind of dismiss class, and I'm happy to chat with you afterwards because I just saw you have another question. I'll remind you that we still have one more space in our Yellowstone trip in May. If you're curious about that, send me an email, sean@northbranchnaturecenter.org. And then please do check out all the wolf literature and stuff in the back corner. I think it'll be a little more enlightening after knowing what you know now. So thank you all for coming out tonight.
So I'll start by welcoming people to our event today. This is, we call it the Veterans Appreciation Day in honor of Veterans Day on Monday, or Sunday and Monday. And this is to honor our veterans and thank them for their service. This is being held at the Brattleboro VA Community Outpatient Clinic. We've been here going on 9 years. And the beauty of being in this area is that we've been able to attract a lot of veterans who previously were not coming to a veterans healthcare system. Today we have refreshments, people are dropping in, and we will be doing another celebration in March 29th for Vietnam veterans. That's a separate appreciation day. Also today I want to thank the VFW Auxiliary for providing refreshments, as well as the Veterans Home, and I have my collaborator and partner here, Gary Yell, who's going to tell us a little bit about how we work together to benefit veterans who might need nursing care.
Well, thank you, Yael. So as Yael stated, my name is Gary Yell. I'm the Director of Marketing for the Vermont Veterans Home. I have to say that it's a privilege to have an association with this CBOC. Yael is a staunch advocate for us veterans. She will go the extra mile to make sure that our needs are met from the federal VA. We must never forget that we are free because of the sacrifices and the service of the veteran. And with that, the Veterans Home honors that sacrifice, and we have the privilege to maintain our country's promise to the veterans, to fulfill their needs, and always have their needs first and foremost in everything that we do.
So I'll just elaborate a little bit on what Gary said in terms of our services. So we are a primary care health center. We have nurse practitioners and or doctors serving as our providers. We have nurses. We provide dietary